Welcome to what is the third of a series of shows produced by the Massachusetts School of Law, highlighting women leaders in various walks of life. I am your host, Constance Rudnick, a professor at MSL. Today's show focuses on successful women in the corporate and business worlds. As of 2008, there were a total of 10.1 million firms owned by women, employing 13 million people and generating $1.9 trillion in revenues. Women own 20% of all firms having revenues over $1 million. Although women make up 46% of the U.S. labor force, they comprise only 3% of the Fortune 500 CEOs, 15.7% of the Fortune 500 corporate officers, and occupy 15.2% of positions on the boards of the nation's richest corporations. The percentage of women holding management positions in Fortune 500 corporations has grown over the past 15 years. But growth since 2002 has been only incremental, even though studies show that Fortune 500 companies with a strong record of promoting women to executive positions are more successful than other firms in the same business. The 15 companies listed on the Fortune 500 with women chief executives represent a cross-section of industry. Patricia Wirtz is the chairman of the board of directors, chief executive officer, and president of Archer Daniels Midland Company. At 27 on the Fortune 500, ADM is the highest ranking company on the list to be run by a woman. In the consumer goods market, Kraft Foods, PepsiCo, Rite Aid, Sara Lee, and Avon are all headed up by women, as are WellPoint, the largest health benefits provider in the United States, DuPont, the international chemical company, and Western Union. But overall, Fortune 500 companies have only 1.6 women directors and 2.6 women officers on average. Why do women continue to be underrepresented in leadership positions of large and mid-sized American corporations? Joining us to discuss this topic today are Shirley Singleton. Shirley is chairman, president, and CEO of Edgewater Technology, a publicly traded technology management consulting firm located in Wakefield, Massachusetts. She's a graduate of Northeastern University.
Well, I was working in a school system in Massachusetts when Proposition 2.5 was voted in, which was a pullback to try to control spending. So what I decided to do was go to one of those little computer schools that you see advertised on television and take some tests to see if I had any predilection to work with hardware or software. I ended up going to school for 6 months and then out of work for a year, and then transitioned into a junior programmer position with a company in Massachusetts. Spent 10 years learning the craft, and then in 1992 founded Edgewater Technology, which is a technical management consulting firm, and sold the company in 1999 to a public entity, thinking that was my swan song and I'll go and start something else. And when the buyers asked me to become the public company CEO. We specialize in EPM, which is Enterprise Performance Management, measuring things in your company in terms of budgeting, planning, forecasting, and our growth areas are healthcare and insurance.
Dr. Radha Jalan is the president and CEO of ElectroChem Inc. in Woburn, Mass. ElectroChem researches, designs, manufactures, and sells fuel cells and hydrogen technologies related products. Its clients in the U.S. include NASA and other government agencies. Dr. Jalan holds a PhD and MED in education from the University of Florida, Gainesville, as well as an undergraduate and master's degree from the University of Calcutta.
During that period, many times I heard the comments that, if I'm not working, there is something wrong, I'm not smart enough, and all those things. So when this opportunity came, it wasn't necessarily to take care of my husband's dream, it was to prove myself. And since I was a stay-at-home mom, my younger one was only 15-year-old, so I felt being in my own business, I will be able to still be a mother. And if it works, then I have proven that I'm smart enough. And if it doesn't, from education to the cutting edge technology, nobody expected me to win. ElectroChem basically works in the hydrogen and fuel cells technology. It is a clean technology to create power, electricity, without any CO2 emissions. And the byproduct is a drinking water. And fuel cells have first flown in the space shuttles. All the space shuttles have the fuel cells, reliable. And we are trying to bring the technology to the commercial level.
Deborah DiSanzo is the CEO of Phillips Healthcare Informatics. This division of Phillips Healthcare is responsible for products that manage the flow of and access to medical data. Deborah holds an MBA from Babson College and a BS in Business Administration and Computer Science from Merrimack College in Andover, Massachusetts.
In 1982, I graduated from my undergraduate degree, and it was a very bad recession in 1982, too, the worst since the one we're having now. And there were no jobs. I studied computer science, and there were no jobs. So I went to work in sales. I was selling electrocardiographs and around the area. And in the 80s, this is what happened to my career. I got one company declared Chapter 11. I got laid off from another company. Third company declared Chapter 7. And the fourth company that I worked for got bought by Hewlett-Packard. Then I did a variety of jobs in Hewlett-Packard in healthcare informatics. And I had the great opportunity to work in our defibrillator division, and we did the now Philips Heart Start defibrillators, and we put defibrillators everywhere. And about 3 years ago, I moved to the patient monitoring business of Philips, and now the healthcare informatics patient monitoring business of Philips. We provide patient monitors, all types of healthcare informatics solutions, picture archiving and communication solutions, cardiology solutions, obstetrical systems, so all the information about a patient is in one place. So if you really think about a hospital and think about the information you need about a patient in a clinical setting, those are the type of solutions that we provide.
Nan Langowitz. Nan is a graduate of Cornell University. She received an MBA from NYU and a doctorate from Harvard Business School. She was the founding director of the Center for Women's Leadership at Babson College here in Massachusetts, the first comprehensive center dedicated to advancing women in business and entrepreneurship at a top 50 business school. She is currently Associate Professor of Management and Entrepreneurship at Babson.
I think everything I know from years of research that I've done is that the women who are successful are just as varied as the panelists we have here, and you know, it doesn't matter so much what your educational background is, but what seems to make a difference is really wanting to stick with it, move forward with your career, have some perseverance about that, take some of the hard knocks that always are going to come along. And often, I think one of the things that makes women successful is to take on some of those jobs that maybe others aren't so interested in doing. That can be a route to creating your own path to success. If you don't take the standard easy ones that everybody's trying to do, you have a chance to stand out from tackling a harder job and making that work to your advantage.
We have two entrepreneurs and one who came up through the established corporate system. Are there any statistics that show which route women are more likely to take in order to get to the top?
Well, I think that what we know about women who start their own firms is actually the same as any entrepreneur, male or female. What drives them across the board is an interest in autonomy and achievement, self-achievement. And I wouldn't say that those things are absent from corporate career folks, but maybe the need for the autonomy isn't as strong, that they're more interested in being part of an organization and being in an organization where there are resources that are available to marshal, whereas entrepreneurs have to kind of be scrappy and come up with those resources. They're laughing over there. You very often have systems in place and processes and resources and assets and funds from a parent corporation that can help you create those changes. All that being said, I'd say Deborah is a great example of a corporate entrepreneur. You know, the Heart Start monitor is an incredible innovation to come out of a very, very big corporation as opposed to a small startup.
Our three guests are in science and technology areas, but are there particular subject matter areas that seem to attract women, in which women tend to move to the top at a greater proportion than other areas?
You know, there's a myth that says women should be in businesses that they sort of know about, you know, quote unquote. You might expect to see them in consumer packaged goods or in personnel or marketing. And certainly women are there, but the data doesn't hold up that that's the only thing women can be successful at or are good at. We do know for starting your own business, there are more women who tend to start businesses in consumer-oriented and in professional services sectors than in some of the manufacturing or high technology sectors. So over here we've got some prime examples of path breakers.
None of our guests have MBAs, right?
Yes.
Oh, you do.
Yes, I
You,
do.
Deborah.
I have an MBA, yeah. I went to Babson and got my MBA at night with a really terrific program, which was I needed to work. I needed to work, so when I had a job and wasn't laid off, I worked and I went to school at Babson at night and had a terrific experience.
Okay. Do you think that that had a positive effect on your ability to rise in the corporate structure?
Well, it helped me quite a bit because I was going at night, and I was going at night with executives who were in the computer industry in Massachusetts. So I would learn a lot from my colleagues, and we actually at Babson, who has such a strong entrepreneurial focus, we did these, we had I forget what it was called at that time, but we created a company, and we really created the company. It was in stereolithography, me and my colleagues, and we won a Founders Day Award. And going through that process of creating the company, getting it up and going, presenting to venture capitalists, getting funding for it, and then winning an award for it, really, it was much more practical than just learning in books.
Actually, Nan, that raises a good point. Is an advanced degree, particularly an MBA, a place where women can not only learn information and skills, but can make connections?
Oh, it's a wonderful way to make connections, just because you're in a classroom with a group of people that hopefully are going to go on to have careers in business, and you'll know who the bankers might be, or they'll know someone who knows someone in an industry that you are interested in getting involved with.
Shirley, did you ever think about getting an MBA once you started the ball rolling?
I'm so happy you asked me that question. I was 15 credits shy of my MBA when I lost my teaching job. So, and at that same time, which was in the time frame you're chatting about, I had just bought a house, so I had the house for 1 month. So when you looked at the landscape of how do I keep my house, and I knew I was going to transition and required learning all day long in terms of going to computer school. So between delivering the newspapers at 4 a.m. in the morning, going to school all day, and then working at a local 7-Eleven at night, my focus came off the MBA, so I had to find my niche, and by the time I found a job, which I had mentioned took me a year, you're so focused on the technology and the specific skills of programming that I was doing that I was constantly learning. It's not just about degrees, it's about continuous learning for the rest of your life. Even if you look at the economy today, which is really tough, and we had to do some layoffs, it wasn't about what degree someone had. It's about flexibility, embracing change, and learning where we need to go with technology. And the degrees sort of stay in the background in that sense.
So for you, it hasn't been a shortcoming or a negative in your career. You've managed to get to the top of a publicly traded company.
Not at all, and the irony is I'm in MBA classes all the time teaching and being, a visiting teacher coming in and talking about how do you start a company. So for me, it did not hold me back. But I think the process of going for degrees, your education is unbelievable, her background. I think that's wonderful, but it goes for the rest of your life. It's not an end point, it's a beginning point.
Let's look at some of the components of what's come to be known as the glass ceiling. That is why women don't succeed in corporate America in greater numbers. And I'm going to ask Nan about her research on these areas, and then if you all would like to contribute on your personal experience. First, lack of role models or mentors.
Well, I think that it's interesting. This generation of young women coming through have plenty of role models. And there's tremendous amount of mentoring going on that's available to women in some corporations. If they have women's networks inside their companies, they can tap into that. There are many, as I was talking about these clusters where there's a lot of support for women in business, there are many industry associations where either the association has a women's group inside it or it's a separate women's business group in your city that you can tap into, and that's a place to find mentors. Nonetheless, we of course still hear people complain about that. I hear it from alums who say, you know, I look around in my company and I just don't see as many women at the top as I'd like to. And so I think that still is a problem, but I also think that it's true that to assume that you have to have a mentor who's a woman is a mistake. You should be looking for who you can learn from, to jump onto Shirley's theme. You know, where can you get the knowledge that you need to get to the next step in your career? And if it's a man, that's fine. If it's a woman, that's fine. But you shouldn't be excluding the men because they've got a lot to teach just as much as the women do.
Deborah, did you have a mentor in any of the jobs that you had or once you got to Phillips who you can actually point to and say, this person had a real positive effect on my ability to rise to the top?
I had men mentors, and I think that a mentor is very important. And I had people who, you know, when you're in a company, a large global company, you need help. So I had men mentors. I looked for the most successful people I could. At the time, there were men. There were no women above me. It didn't bother me. I looked for men mentors, and I asked them for advice. It should be the smartest person who's going to teach you what you need to learn at the moment.
Can you share with us how you went about establishing the mentor?
I'm glad you asked me that question, because today I have young women who come to me and say, I would like you to be my mentor. And I say, absolutely, I'd be happy to be your mentor. What do you need? And if someone comes without a plan or what they need to learn or doesn't take the initiative with you, I mean, you're going to go to very smart and busy people. You need to have a plan. So I would go with, this is what I need. This is how often I would like to meet with you. I will only take 15 minutes of your time a month, but I would really appreciate it if you could give that to me.
During the 10 years prior to starting Edgewater, I found the same thing. I would watch and observe and listen very carefully to all of the supervisors who were all men, and sort of formed a patchwork quilt of mentorship, because this one person might do this particularly well and this other person did this well. So I sort of did a composite mentorship of the men that I reported to during those 10 years of learning. When I started Edgewater, I felt that I wanted to take to the next generation a culture that promotes mentorship and learning and team building. So I set about to start what I would call tiger teams. It's about building a company and teaching them about building a business, and hopefully an entrepreneurial flair to it, because I want them to reinvent themselves and be an employee for as long as I can possibly hold them, versus going off somewhere and starting their own company.
I would say that I really did not have any mentor. So I did rely on reading the books or the magazines, and go to the conferences, which helped in the networking and listening and learning from them. I did go to, early on, I did go to weekend programs. Our Tux school, they had a program for the minority business-owned entrepreneurs. So I did go there to get some basics of running a business. So it has been a challenge, but I've learned from all the different people that I meet and talk and get the ideas, and just keep moving. And it is very satisfying that against all the odds, we have been able to prevail and making some good progress in the technology.
How about the thought that women are willing to settle financially, and therefore they don't seek to rise. They do it through their own choice because for always women have made less for the same job.
I think most of the research says that the gender pay gap that exists right now, which is 78 cents to the dollar, is not because women haven't been asking to be paid fairly. If your colleagues next to you are starting $3,000, $5,000 higher than you over the time of 2 and 3 and 5% raises compounded, you're going to fall further and further behind. So we try to encourage women to think about asking about that salary number and negotiating. And there is some research that documents that women are not as good at asking, at having those negotiations. It's another reason to have a network, because then you can call your friends and say, you know, what should somebody in this kind of role be paid, or do you know anybody in this field who I could talk to about, you know, what's a fair benchmark here? With respect to whether women's financial aspirations are reduced compared to men, we don't have any evidence to support that, really. And in fact, more and more we're seeing women as the primary breadwinners of their families. Even if there are 2 earners in the family, increasingly women are the primary breadwinners. So the myths are starting to change. The myths about women not being able to work while they have young children are completely gone. Most women with children under the age of 5 are in the workplace, in a job. And so that notion of the traditional you have to stay at home, maybe for economic reasons, maybe because of changes in social norms, that is going out the window as well.
Okay, you put your CEO hats on. When you're dealing with women subordinates, do you find that they are less demanding in terms of their salary? And if so, either their starting salary or incremental raises along the line? And if so, why, and how do you handle that, Deborah?
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with what Nan says more. In comparing the women and men who work for me, not only for salary increases, but for promotions or grade level increases, which also determine your salary. The men are always asking, always asking. It won't be a quarter that goes by that they don't say, how do I get to the next level? When do you think pay raises are going to come back? And women almost never. And I talk to them about it all the time. And I was talking to a young girl in my organization just a couple of weeks ago, saying you have to advocate for yourself. Nobody's going to advocate for you because people are busy. It's not intentional, but if you have person A and person B, and person A is advocating and person B is not, person A is going to get it. It's the greasy wheel, and I don't think it's intentional. It's that you have to advocate for yourself.
I think if you recall a little bit back in the year 2000, there was the internet bubble and everything was going wild in the stock market, and whether it was a man or a woman, they were all not shy in coming in and saying, when are you going to make me a millionaire? And so I had more of a problem managing expectations that the internet bubble was going to be like the potato famine. It's going to burst here. So in getting their expectations managed down, quite frankly. When someone approaches me for a raise or keeps dinging at when can I move up, when can I move up, I often point to, let's talk about a 3-step program on where you are right now and where you want to be, and that I would be willing to put some skin in the game if you can achieve certain levels.
I would think that somebody graduating from college would have a hard time believing, a woman graduating from college or getting an MBA in their early to mid-20s would have a hard time believing that they really were going to be discriminated against or weren't going to get the same shot that a man got.
Well,
in the
I
same
think,
situation.
you know, what we know is that there's certainly much less, if any, overt discrimination going on these days. And if there is, it's rarely at the entry-level positions. because companies know that that's not legal and they're going to get into trouble, and there's a war for talent on. So they do want to make the best offers to the best kinds of qualified people that they can find, regardless of their gender. What I think becomes problematic over time, and this is where it's harder to sort out what's going on, is there are a lot of informal cues that go on in organizations about what it takes to move forward. And particularly for women who may have other private responsibilities to their families, they're not always as available to do that kind of networking, often at the end of the day or on a business trip, so that they don't necessarily find out what some of those cues are as quickly or as easily. And that can be problematic. So they don't necessarily know, oh, there's a job opening up in Denver. Maybe I should put my hat in the ring to go after that job, because they went home at 5:30 to pick up the kids, and the other people went out for a drink, and so they know about it, and she doesn't. Now, that being said, I do think there's a different change going on with this generation, which is that both men and women of this generation are interested in more than just what happens at work. And our male students are increasingly wondering, what else is my life going to look like beyond my job? So they're not defining themselves as whatever their occupation will be. And the women aren't doing that either. And so everyone is looking for, how do all the pieces of my life fit together? And that's a new challenge for organizations, because they're used to the baby boom generation who said, please give me the job, and I will come and I will put in my 40, 50, 60, 80 hours a week, and I will thank you for it. Well, many corporations have broken their contract with their employees over the years. You don't have the long-term employment. You don't necessarily have the benefits. Economic upheavals have pushed people out of jobs. And so that whole social contract around business and what your career is between the company and the employee is up for grabs. And our younger people see it. So they're asking other questions.
I don't know if I entirely agree with you, Nan.
No? Okay, good.
Oh, good. Tension. Please, Deborah.
When I started working, I think that informal go for drinks and after work was much more prevalent than it is today. As you say, men and women today, they want to get home to their family. I honestly see very little difference between the men who have young children at home, or even don't, who just want to get home, do something else, go exercise, what have you. So I think that network of going out after work for a drink, of business getting done, I don't think that happens much. That has become much less important. A network is important, though, because you have to know if the job is open in Denver. But what I wanted to get to was this notion of work-life balance, I think, which you were touching on, in that you have to have a life too. It was interesting to me, the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard at the time, Luke Platt, and also the CEO of Phillips, Harold Kleisterly, said the same thing 10 years apart. And that was, not every job has work-life balance. And I think my job has far less work-life balance than a software engineer's job, where you can come in, you can do your work. And so you have to say, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to make a difference, and you have to let the other parts of your life work. And because if you're going to make a substantial business, your mind has to be in it. Your mind has to be in it. So the thought that, I'm going to have perfect work-life balance as I go up the ladder, or as I build my company, I think it's not there. I think you do get more balance to work if you're going to run or build a substantial thing.
One of the areas that I read about in preparing for today was that people think that women, or attribute women's attitude towards risk, that women are risk averse and men love risk. And that's one of the reasons why men climb to the top at greater proportions than women, vis-a-vis where the raw numbers where they start out. Mm-hmm. What is your feeling?
So I can tell you that we do have some of that data with respect to starting a company. And if you look at, we do a lot of work at Babson with something called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. And we have looked at this question in 62 countries around the globe. The question of fear of failure. Does fear of failure keep you from starting the business? If you look at men versus women entrepreneurs, there is no significant difference in their attitudes. What's different is the entrepreneurs are significantly different from the non-entrepreneurs about how they answer that question. So it's a myth, and I think that myth really needs to go away.
Well, clearly, we have 3 people for whom business risk was absolutely not a problem. So tell me, what have you seen in your management of the corporations?
I have the male working with me, and they are very risk averse. I am the one who's saying, why not? Let's try this. No,
So it's just a personality trait, and it isn't a gender-based personality
I do
trait.
agree. I think that's what it is.
Shirley?
That and being naive helps. I didn't know how hard it was to start a company, but you know, when you have no job and you're going to lose your house, and you're right, there were no jobs back then. You know, what the heck? You know, let's get a skill and try something new. So once you take the plunge, it doesn't seem so bad. I think the error that I made, if there was a glaring one, is not figuring out how do you exit. You hear about classic business plans and career planning, and people talk about, well, what's your exit strategy? I get asked that by investors in our public company and so forth. And I was just so busy building it, and I didn't have an end in sight. I didn't know how big it could be. So I find it interesting that lots of folks figure, you know, that has to be a key ingredient. For me, it wasn't. I just figured I'd float on to the next thing and I'd figure it out.
It is not that women are averse to the risk. It's a challenge. And everybody enjoys a challenge. It means I knew what I was getting into. It means I was looking into 6 month, 2 year. If I can just make it for 2 years, because my daughter was a sophomore in the high school. And I said, if I can keep it for 2 years, so I don't have to change my residence or anything, that will be great. This is 17 years now. So I think when women take a lot of risk also, then there are pressures around who don't believe in you. And they say, you must be crazy. That's not real. This is not going to happen. So even if you take the risk, you are not getting any credit for it, and actually it becomes a constraint on your growth.
Let me ask you a question. If it had been the reverse situation in your life, and that is you had started a company, your husband was not involved in the company, maybe he was a stay-at-home dad or had another business and another training, and you suddenly passed away and left this vision and little else, do you think that people would have said the same to your husband? You're crazy, how can you take over your wife's business?
No, they wouldn't, and I think that's the difference.
So it's people's attitude towards women executives.
Absolutely. Means I do feel what I have accomplished, if it was a guy in my place, he would have done much, much better than what I have been able to.
You think that, or you think people think that?
I think that.
You think that?
That I would have, if there was a guy in my place, he would have done much better than what I have been able to. Because when women take those kind of risks, there is a very little support or encouragement from the financial community or from the banks and whatnot. So that becomes the really restricting factor, not women's aspirations in the risk-taking, but it is the environment outside which is not supporting those risk takers.
There is far less media coverage for women who start their own businesses and grow them. What you tend to see is sort of what I call the Cinderella hard luck story. So they might take a story like Radha's and say, oh, poor woman, you know, left a widow. Look how she's grown this business. And it would be sort of poor Cinderella from mopping the floors. Finally, she
owns the castle.
Right, own the castle. But what you don't see are the more standard stories of, I decided I'm going to start this business. Here's my career. you know, Shirley's career, 10 years in IT before she starts her own firm, and look how she's turned it into a public company, and look how they couldn't even let her leave. She was so valuable. But you don't tend to see a lot of media coverage of that. The research is really clear on that. One of my colleagues has called it invisible entrepreneurs. Women are invisible entrepreneurs. They're not as widely covered in the business media. And that then has sort of a ripple effect. The bankers think, well, you know, not as interesting a company. Maybe I shouldn't take her call. And so they are less likely to give it credence that this is a valid business idea that should get support. And that just sort of ripples around. So that's a problem that, you know, a show like this, frankly, can help do.
How about women aren't aggressive or assertive?
Well, you know, the word aggressive is a double-edged sword, right, for women in particular. So if you're aggressive, you're a go-getter, right? A go-getter is a good thing in business. But women wind up with this problem where what's expected of women often because of social norms is that they won't be loud, they won't bang their fists, they won't necessarily be cutthroat trying to negotiate a deal. And so when you take that social expectation of the role of women and put it into the business world where most of our expectations of leaders are based on male models, you get what's been called role incongruity, which is that women are trying to negotiate this social norm that's out there, and even one that they may think of for themselves of how they want to appear. But the business situation and the leadership situation calls for behavior that's a little bit different. And so how do you navigate that? And I think that's a tricky, I mean, I'd love to know what you would all say about that, but I think it's a tricky business.
I think that assertiveness is very important. I mean, you have to assert for yourself, you have to assert for your business, you have to assert for your employees. So you must be assertive, and I think I fall into the assertive category. However, I don't fall into the category of banging on the table or talking loudly or being overly boastful. And so I have found a way to make that work for me, to be who I am in my personality, which isn't particularly loud but I am very assertive. And I think that I think for me, being assertive with data, being assertive with proof points, being assertive with the information, making sure that I'm on top of everything overcomes, I think there is a norm that, you know, you're going to be tough, you're going to be aggressive, you're going to pound on the table. I can't do that. It would look silly. I have a very good colleague of mine who is more aggressive in the pounding on the table way, and she succeeds her way, and I succeed my way. So I think maybe that's a very good thing. Now, we work very hard, we both have all the data, we both know our businesses very well, and those two different styles are working for each one of us.
Two other things I want to talk about, and that is we've skirted around this a little, touched on it, the idea that women are the primary homemakers and caregivers, and that takes time, and therefore it's a real, it is a practical issue, that women can't succeed because they just aren't able to put the kind of time in that men are, that whatever we say, we are still living in a society which makes women presumptively the primary caregiver and homemaker, men secondarily. So if a job requires 60 hours a week, the more likely candidate to be able to fulfill that is a man. A woman has other demands. Is that proving true?
I think that what employers have to really focus on is who's interested in that job, who has the abilities to do that job, and not to make the decisions in advance of offering the opportunities to the women or to the men. You wouldn't offer an opportunity to a man on the assumption that, of course, he can travel, which often happens. They get discriminated against in that way. Of course, you'll want to pick up your whole family and move across the country and take this great promotion. Well, maybe not. And the same thing for women, that one shouldn't assume that, oh, she just had a child last year, you know, we can't ask her to take this job, it's got such a high travel component. So I think encouraging companies to really think about the talent that they need for the job that they want done and who their best candidates are, and then give them those choices is really essential. I think that we know that there are many women and men who are making arrangements to have the careers they would like to have and to have the family lives they would like to have. And it's really not anybody in the company's business how they do that. I think that's a change that has to come, whether it's actually in place. I think it's evolving.
Deborah, you would say that something's got to give, and it's generally the home life.
I think that generally you're right, that society still views the women as, as taking care of the home. So what do? You get help. So, but you have to be willing to get help. You have to say, not complain about it, not say, oh gee, I have to make arrangements for my daughter's Emily's daycare or Emily's camp, or oh gosh, I have to clean my house because my husband's not going to clean my house, So you have to be willing to say, I need help, and then go get an au pair or a nanny or excellent daycare. Go get a house cleaner. Go get the help you need, because it is true. But then reach out, get the help. You can do it. You can get it done.
When I look at my daughter, who is in the corporate world, and last year or so we were talking, and she said, Mom, what do you think about the idea of house husband? Because her husband is in a software business. I said, hey, this is fine, as long as it works for you guys. But he has to recognize that if he's at home, then he has to take care of all the chores that otherwise. And she said, oh, he doesn't mind. And I said, then that is great. So I think we need to have the social norms have to change. And I like Nan's suggestion that it is who will do the job, whether it is a male or a female. And I think the corporations need to look at from that perspective and offer the opportunities accordingly rather than the gender. And then the working couple, they will decide that what works for that individual family setup.
So have things changed since you started out, Shirley, in terms of women's ability to succeed in the corporate world, as you have observed it both from in your corporation and in other businesses with whom you work?
Sure, I think there's been a lot of changes. Today is the day we're celebrating man's walk on the moon 40 years ago. And when I was thinking about coming today and I was thinking about what questions I would be asked, it occurred to me to tell you this story, that one of my last students that I had in school before I lost my job was a woman who ended up being an astronaut, and she spent 6 months up on the space station, and today she's in NASA and being a major player behind the scenes after having done her spacewalk. So when I think about her as a 17-year-old and being on my track team, I never would have thought in a million years she'd be an astronaut. So absolutely, things have changed.
How about a little nugget of advice to young women or women who want to join the corporate world at a slightly later age? What would you say from your experience? If you could just give them a little bit of advice, what would it be, Deborah?
I did what Nan said. I took the hard jobs, the jobs that other people didn't want, and then I worked to make a difference. I always thought I was going to make a difference in the world, whether it was home defibrillators or informatics. Make a difference. Focus on what you're going to do for the world. Focus on making a difference. Not so much your career, not so much where you go. Focus on doing the right thing, making a difference.
Women have to recognize that we can make a difference. But one of the things that has helped me, and I always tell younger women who are not working or anything, get involved into the community. Get onto the board position in the nonprofit groups. I learned a lot by being on the boards and being the president of those nonprofits, because that is your informal learning in managing the budget, managing the people, and there is no price to it because it is not, related to your P&L. So I would suggest that women should get involved into all of those, take those responsibilities, and learn while raising children or doing anything else.
I would also add that if you are looking for a mentor and you are asking for help, and And I'm blessed that lots of people ask me for help, and you're right, they do need to have a plan. But I think part B of that is that they need to be open to hearing what you have to say. I've had a number of women come up and ask for, could I have a cup of coffee, and I'd love for you to be my mentor. And I went for coffee, and the whole hour was telling me everything they've done in their lives. And so it makes you wonder, what is it that I can do for you, or any woman can do for someone else? You really do have to have a plan, but part B is you really have to have an open mind to receive the information back and make a change.
And take suggestions from
Exactly.
people who you respect and follow through on them.
Right, right.
Nan, you get the last word.
Oh, wow. Well, one of the things I often say to my students is, to not be afraid to take a step. You're taking a step, you're climbing just a little bit higher in the treetop so you can see what else is out there, because often you don't know exactly. This notion that we all are somehow wake up and know exactly what we want to be when we grow up, I think is crazy, and many people struggle with that myth that they're supposed to know. So take a step, don't be afraid to take the step, and you'll find out what else you see when you get to through that next experience, and what else is beyond the trees. And then you have the opportunity, if you're a lifelong learner, as Shirley was saying, to say, hey, that looks exciting. I'm going to go over there. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to, maybe I'll start by volunteering, but eventually I'm going to make my way over into that field. And then you just go for it.
Unfortunately, discrimination against women in the workplace in 2009 is alive and well. It manifests not so much in terms of access to the workplace, which was a prevalent form of earlier iterations of discrimination. It manifests in terms of opportunities for advancement and promotion, the ability for a woman to succeed in the workplace. Women are often the first to go when there are layoffs or terminations. Problems with the workplace environment, sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination. Essentially, every recognized form of discrimination exists in today's workplace.
There have been federal laws prohibiting gender-based discrimination in the workplace for many decades. But your experience is that it is continuing.
High-profile cases center primarily on pay inequity, which is the mother of all inequities that is at the heart of gender discrimination in the workplace. Probably the largest class action lawsuit is the Walmart case, that 1.6 million women who worked at Walmart from 1998 forward have obtained at the lower court level on a case that deals with systemic pay inequity. Other major federal class action cases that have addressed pay inequity for women. Boeing, the manufacturing giant, paid $72 million for its pay inequity affecting its female workers. Morgan Stanley, the investment banker giant, paid $75 million to settle a pay inequity case. It's in these large class action cases where we are seeing some real action and results at the federal level that are at least giving something back to the women who have been affected by the systemic pay inequity that continues to plague us today.
What is motivating these wide-scale, clear violations of same work, same pay?
2 words: gender bias. And gender bias takes many subtle forms that play out in thousands and countless little employment decisions, micro inequities that lead to macro inequities. And one of the best authoritative sources on this subject, a fascinating book by our former Lieutenant Governor Evelyn Murphy, who published Getting Even: Why Women Are Paid Less in America and What to Do About It. And her book collects data from major sex discrimination cases over a period of 10 years And she concludes that what's at the heart of pay inequity cases, which are really sort of the core of the inequalities in the workplace for women, is simply old-fashioned bias that affects so many decisions that are made about women. And her book sort of debunks the popular notion that the pay inequity for women is a result of women's own choices.
Obviously, if they don't find out, if women either individually or collectively don't find out that there's comparable, a man in a comparable position is making more, then there really isn't, that may be one reason why more cases are not brought. Is that correct? There's no duty on the part of any employer to divulge the pay rates, scales, or salaries of comparable workers.
Mm-hmm. Right? That's absolutely true, and typically that information is confidential. And a good case in point on that subject is Lilly Ledbetter, who's named for the new legislation that passed in the early days of the Obama administration, which makes it easier for underpaid women to get their back wages back. That Lilly Ledbetter's case went to the Supreme Court, and they said, sorry, Ms. Ledbetter, even though you didn't know for years that it was concealed that women were being paid less than men, the statute of limitations has passed for those earlier claims, and you can only recover for more recent violations. Well, Congress acted with remedial legislation to fix that problem.
Let's move on to the next area of the sort of discrimination, and that is harassing workplace or a harassing environment.
A hostile work environment or harassment at work is a form of gender discrimination. It's, referred to as sexual harassment. Hostile work environment is a form of that, and I want to first start by saying what it's not, that laws prohibiting the sexual harassment of women are not morality-based laws or clean language laws or laws intended to protect delicate beings from vulgarities in the workplace. They are part of the fabric of the equal opportunity law, that if by virtue of your gender you walk into an environment where you are being humiliated by stares and comments about your body, you're being subjected to lewd sexual conversation and in many cases images in the workplace, that alters the playing field, that you don't just have to deal with doing your job and meeting your job expectations. You have this sort of assault that you have to deal with simultaneously. And so how the body of hostile environment law has emerged, that if a woman is being harassed because of her sex, and that simply means the same conduct is not happening to her male peers, and it happens frequently enough or it's severe enough to affect the terms and conditions of her workplace, then she does not have equal opportunity in the workplace, and it's the employer's job to remedy that and fix that. So hostile work environment that's severe and affects a woman's job is one form of sexual harassment law. The other type of case is the sort of more easily understood quid pro quo, that a job benefit, a promotion, a raise, a job itself is conditioned on providing sexual favors. That is less frequent, certainly in the white collar world. It's not non-existent, and there are plenty of cases dealing with that kind of subtle coercive conduct. But again, it's rooted in discrimination laws that it affects women in the workplace and hinders their ability to do their job, even when they're not ultimately fired because they didn't submit to advances, but they simply have to work under this cloud and this additional burden that the man working next to them doesn't have to.
One would think in 2009 that discrimination on the basis that somebody is pregnant or has had children and therefore is incapable of doing certain work would have really disappeared. But in researching for today's interview, I came across something that startled me, and that is that Bloomberg L.P., which is the limited partnership which may or may not be controlled by Mayor Bloomberg of the city of New York, is being sued for pregnancy discrimination. So can you enlighten us on what the law prohibits and tell us a little about this case?
Sure. The law prohibits treating women differently because they have had a baby, they're going to have a baby, they've taken maternity leave. Both state and federal law protects pregnancy as a distinct and separate category from gender, although it is obviously part of gender discrimination because it only, at least so far, only affects women. That's a big form of sex discrimination today, and again, because of these sort of cultural assumptions and stereotypes that, you know, you can't be a 24/7 professional and be a good mother. Men view women with children as less committed and less competent, whether or not it bears any relationship to the reality. And in the Bloomberg case that you mentioned, I noted that that class involved 72 of the 500 women who work there, and that's 1 in 7 of the workers. And it's very much part of these sort of male-dominated cultures, which, you know, view women in traditional terms that don't fit in the workplace. And so it's not simply the term that Evelyn Murphy used in her book, working while a female, that's a problem, but working with an 8-month pregnant belly and, you know, working with a lot of little kids at home simply just reinforces those triggers that, you know, that women are to be with children and women are mothers first and professionals second. So you see a lot of pregnancy discrimination.
Do you have any advice for women who might want to avoid falling between the cracks of pay or promotion, discrimination on the basis of gender? Is there anything that your experience has taught you that women should do when they enter a job or the workforce that will keep them from becoming a victim of pay or promotion discrimination?
Be proactive in navigating your career. And I know, you know, sort of the advice is different depending on what level of the economy and the workforce people are working, that there are obviously various pressures on various socioeconomic groups, but all women want to be paid a fair wage. All women want to advance in their job, no matter, you know, whether it's a white collar or a blue collar. And the advice I would commend to everybody to read the Evelyn Murphy book, Getting Even. She also has a website that I believe is the Wage Project. It encourages women to talk to each other, to get support, to mobilize resources, that before you go in and talk to the boss about, you know, gee, why is my raise only X%, or why haven't I gotten a raise in 5 years, to mobilize support from other women and get the collective stories and experience of other women, because collective action is much more likely to get attention. And that women just have to understand going into the workplace that there is this implicit systemic bias that exists, and, you know, be on the lookout and be proactive in trying to make sure you're treated fairly. You can be better prepared to, you know, try to make sure it doesn't happen to you. But ultimately, I think real change is not going to come outside of litigation, and that this class litigation in particular that we've been talking about.